You are watching SABC News live from Johannesburg, and these are your headlines at this hour. 3 Israeli hostages are expected to return from Gaza today after Egyptian and Qatari mediators helped to avert a standoff that threatened to sink a fragile ceasefire that has halted fighting for almost a month now.
Children should avoid direct contact with people that are already infected.
Well, the KwaZulu-Natal Health Department has confirmed 36 cases of hand, foot and mouth disease at several primary schools in Durban.
So our mission is peace and to ensure that there is security on the African continent.
President Cyril Ramaphosa says the AU summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia this weekend is important as it comes at a time when Africa is grappling with challenges of political and security instability. All right, so very good afternoon. Thanks very much for joining us. You are watching the Week in Review with myself, Israel Wilson. Of course, for the next 2 hours, we will be reviewing some of the biggest stories of the week, stories that affect you and, of course, have been grappling kept the headlines grappling. My name is Israel Wilson. As I mentioned, it's wonderful to be with you. Let's delve into some of those top stories for the first hour of the show. Well, so we're going to start things off now. The African Union Summit got underway in Addis Ababa today. The current peace and security challenges around the world will be discussed by leaders and the invited international guests. This AU summit comes at a time where fighting's raging in the eastern part of the DRC and in Sudan. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres will address the summit. He will call for better leadership around the world, where the wars in the DRC and Sudan will dominate the summit as well. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has called on leaders to pay attention to challenges of peace and security in Africa. All right, so for more on this story, we now have SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena joining us here in studio. Sophie, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us at this hour. We're looking at the developments, the significance of this summit. How important is the summit as we speak?
Well, I think the summit is quite important. I looked at information coming from Addis Ababa. I can see many people from the continent have attended this gathering, including business. I saw Ali Dangote, Tomi Elemau from Nigeria. These are powerful businessmen from Nigeria. I saw the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who spoke earlier on, including the representative of the Arab League. We expect the president or a representative from Palestine to also deliver the speech. As you can see on the screen now is the president of Angola, who has just been elected as the chair of the assembly. In other words, leading at the AU level, the heads of state and government level for a year 2025. That is President João Lorenzo of Angola. As you know, that he is also charged with the responsibility to ensure that there's peace in the DRC. He is currently delivering his acceptance speech. We expect that after he has delivered his speech, then the process of electing the AU Commission chairperson will start. We know that Musa Faki Mohammed is now leaving office. He spoke earlier on. He got a standing ovation in terms of him now handing over to the person who will be the new leader of this important continental body. And we also expect the issues that are related to peace and security to dominate the summit. But we know that the theme of the summit has got to do with justice for Africa and the people of African descent, true reparation. You know that Africa has been calling on the former colonizers to do what is right in terms of reparations. We know that the developed North is pushing back, but it looks like this matter is now high on the agenda of the African continental body, the AU.
Well, Sophie, thank you very much for painting that picture and also just bringing us up to speed as to what is happening. Key issues are also going to emerge. You mentioned justice being one of them. So we're looking at peace and security at large. The DRC is the elephant in the room. Has there been any word from the AU on this matter?
Well, yesterday we saw the meeting on the margins of the summit that started officially today, where there was a discussion on the DRC. Unfortunately, the president of the DRC decided not to attend that meeting. He chose to go to Germany in Europe, where we saw him giving flowers to the First Lady as part of Valentine, and then addressing that summit in Munich, where they were discussing issues of, again, dominating the political landscape around the world. But he didn't attend the AU summit. Then we saw the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, launching a scathing attack on DRC, saying that DRC leader is avoiding the responsibility or take responsibility internal problems of that country, but rather deciding to blame other countries. And the irony is that in Munich, in Germany, the president of the DRC, Felix Tshisekedi, when he was asked about the situation in the DRC, he blamed the M23 rebels, but this time around, he said they are being supported by the former president of the DRC, Joseph Kabila. We know that during his first term, Joseph Kabila gave him the numbers to ascend to the presidency, because the first election, he didn't win that election. It was through the help of Kabila. So now there's a fallout. Now he has again pointed a finger at Joseph Kabila, saying Joseph Kabila is behind destabilizing the whole country, that is the DRC. But also saying that he is not going to engage with the M23 rebels, as we heard that the meeting of EAC and SADC has requested that there must be an inclusive dialogue. Therefore, this is what's happening. But we expect the meeting of the Peace and Security Council that is going to elect new members of the Peace and Security Council to be very heated, because this matter is going to come up again. And therefore, we know that on the margins of the AU, I think President Ramaphosa will also engage other leaders, including perhaps the UN chief, on the issue of the DRC. As you know, that South Africa lost 14 soldiers. Yeah. And the current problem is that you still have South African troops trapped in the eastern part of the DRC. And with the rebel advancing, the South African troops and others who are there, they are now on their own, because we saw the Congolese and the Burundian troops fleeing Bukavu. Now that has been, as we had the reports, being under the M23, or the M23 making inroads in that area. And therefore, the question is what's going to happen to the South African contingent. Behind the scenes, we know that there are discussions in terms of ensuring that there's cessation of hostilities, there's ceasefire, and the peace process gets underway. And therefore, then you can think of withdrawing the troops. But as you do that, how are you going to do it? The airport in Goma, it's not usable. And therefore, if you pull out, you have to use the route either through Uganda, Rwanda, or Burundi. So these are the issues that have been discussed. But secondly, the M23 is saying when you leave the weapons, and those countries who are there as part of the peacekeeping mission, some of them there as part of the SADC contingent enforcing peace there, they are saying there's no way they can leave the weapons behind if they leave that area. And therefore, the elephant in the room, we are correct, is the DRC. It has certainly divided leaders as leaders take different postures.
So, Sophie, staying on this matter, also given the shifting geopolitical landscape, you mentioned some of the business and other world leaders in attendance as well. The UN chief also spoke about the matter. Perhaps you could reiterate what his message was all about.
Yes, the UN chief has called for cessation of hostilities, ceasefire, and the dialogue, to start, the peace process to start. And you can only have this when there's cessation of hostilities and a ceasefire. We know, as I pointed out, the current chair of the assembly, that is the president of Angola, Lorenzo, is currently mediating on behalf of SADC. You also have the former President of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, who was given the responsibility by the East Africa community to assist. You know that the DRC is a member of SADC and also a member of EAC. And therefore, you have to bring these two processes together and find a solution. So now Lorenzo, being a chair of the assembly, I don't know whether he will ask someone to step in as a mediator on behalf of SADC. And this process was endorsed by the AU because now he's the chair of the assembly of the AU, and therefore he is a final word in terms of what's likely going to come out of these processes. So he can't hold the mediation process and also being the head of the continental body at the assembly, at the heads of state and government, because this matter will finally be presented to him. So I'm monitoring. I want to see what is going to happen with that. And also, how are you going to infuse both SADC and East Africa in ensuring that you have a more inclusive dialogue? We've had already, as I pointed out, that the president of the DRC is saying he is not going to meet with M23 rebels. Both SADC and the EAC leaders are saying there must be an inclusive dialogue, because if you exclude M23, you risk a situation where fighting will continue. And I remember the president made a point on Thursday when he was addressing Parliament in reply, saying that when he presented at the summit in Tanzania last week, where you had AU and representatives, SADC, and also the EAC, he made an example of South Africa, how South Africans or the liberation organizations were able to engage with the oppressors and those who killed the black majority. They didn't say, because you killed us, we are not going to engage with you. And therefore asking a question, why the Congolese, all of them, irrespective of their political inclination, religious background, but they are Congolese, why they can't come to a table and discuss this?
Sophie, I know that there is a clip, based on what the UN Secretary General had to say. Let's take a listen in.
We also need justice when it comes to your abundant critical minerals. Too often, your countries are plundered, bound to the bottom of value chains as others grow rich on your resources. The work of the United Nations Panel on Critical Energy Transition Minerals is designed to help embed justice, sustainability, and human rights across the value chain. Africa's minerals must benefit Africa's people.
So, Sophie, again, justice, is key, being reiterated there, but just also looking at how representation is also important for engagement. So as we actually look at what is happening in the DRC, perhaps as the summit is underway, I mean, what's the latest on that front? I know that the M23 rebels a few hours ago entered the second biggest city and got the Bukavu airport. So we're also looking at how the president of the DRC is not at the AU. What can we then begin to read from this at large?
I think that's where the problem is. And I think SADC and EAC leaders are correct to say you have to engage the M23 rebels. Yes, no one condones rebel movements. But at this point in time, with the advanced situation we see, them capturing the eastern part of the DRC, you have to engage them. There is just no way. And they are advancing. And their leader is now in Germany as this is happening at this moment. And therefore, I think the UN chief is correct to say a cessation of hostilities, ceasefire, and dialogue must begin now. And it must be an inclusive dialogue. And the other issue that people must be aware of, it's the international interest. Developing countries, the scramble for DRC resources. And the SG is talking about that because the other factor is internal and external. The external factor, it's people who want to continue to plunder the resources of the DRC and the resources of Africa by extension. And that call from the UN chief saying the resources, the minerals of Africa must benefit Africans. I think this is where you can see that DRC, the minerals of DRC don't benefit the people of the Congo and by extension the people of Africa. And therefore the external influence is immense on all sides, and it's something that you also have to deal with. And therefore let's hope today the leaders will be frank, because they are all there to discuss a way forward and how do you ensure that there's peace and security in that area. And inclusive dialogue is the only solution. Whether you like Tshisekedi, you like Paul Kagame, you like M23 and other many forces, because they are many. It's not just the M23.
Yeah.
One thing that you must bear in mind is that unless you bring all of them to the table, you are not going to find a solution. Now Tshisekedi is also saying that he is prepared to only speak to the Rwandan president, Paul Kagame, but he doesn't want to speak to M23. Kagame is the president of Rwanda. Yes, he's important because of the FDLR, the genocide, who have fled to the Congo. But you cannot exclude your own sisters and brothers, the Congolese themselves. As South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has pointed out that during the dark days of apartheid, during the negotiations, everybody was brought at the table. Only those who didn't want to join the negotiations were left outside. You negotiate with your enemies, not your friends.
Yeah, so we are monitoring those developments as the AU summit gets underway. As you mentioned, the chair of the assembly had just been elected, and we're obviously looking forward to the election of the AU Commission chairperson that's set to take place as well. Thank you very much for weighing in at this hour. Again, Sophie Mugwena is SABC News International Editor, weighing in as that summit is underway in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. So we'll leave that conversation there and be right back with plenty more action. This is The Week in Review. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is The Week in Review with myself, Lisa Wilson. Let's continue with more action. In fact, MK Party MP Duduzile Zuma has issued another apology after insulting the party Secretary General Floyd Shivambu. Earlier this week, she referred to him as the worst thing to happen to the party. Zuma Sabundla made a second apology in 3 days after several tweets against Party Secretary General Floyd Shivambu earlier this week. So the swearing at Shivambu drew a great deal of criticism. And in the latest apology, dated the 13th of February, Zuma Sabundla, who is the MKP leader, Jacob Zuma's daughter, expressed regret and acknowledged that her words and actions may have caused harm. So to look at the latest developments, we're going to be joined online by political analyst Prof. Dirk Coetzee. Prof. Dirk, good afternoon. Thank you so much for making time to be with us here on the SABC. So we're obviously just looking at the developments, and we're looking at what has transpired in the face of all of this. This incident in particular seems to be about personality clashes and perhaps even ill discipline. But with deeper introspection, of course, we're trying to understand what it's reflecting about organizational culture and even the structure at large. How would you weigh in?
Yes, I think it is very important to look at the MK Party structure, its constitution, how it visualizes itself from a point of view of to function as an entity, not in terms of only persons. And therefore, I think, first of all, to look at the position of the President Zuma now. The Constitution gives him exceptionally strong powers. Everything in the end can be decided by the President. For example, in Section 7.2 of the Constitution that deals with the President, there are different components. For example, it says that he can appoint basically everyone, from the top 8, the officials, the national officials, the national high command, of 45 plus then the officials and others, as well as the provincial conveners. He can appoint all of them. He can also issue presidential decrees So even though the National High Command is regarded as the highest decision-making body, the president can override the National High Command decisions. So it is a very centralized one. At the same time, they talk also about that they embrace the principle of democratic centralism, which means that if a decision has been taken, everyone else in the party must follow that decision. An open debate and further continuation about whether it is the best decision or not is simply not allowed. Now, that is a principle that the ANC also uses, but in practice, it's not enforced. I think in MK, there will be much more of enforcement of this. I think another point which is quite striking in these events that we are looking at now is the position of the deputy president. The deputy president does not have powers of his own. It's all about deputizing for the president. And what we see currently is that the deputy president, Dr. Sloppy, acts de facto as the parliamentary leader of the party. But what we've seen lately also now is that, for example, his participation in the SONA speech, the discussion of the SONA address of President Ramaphosa, there's now some contestation about whose speech did he actually present. Was it his own speech or a speech that was presented to a large extent or finalized by President Zuma and the persons close to him? So again, it comes back to the position of President Zuma and how absolutely central he is placed within the party.
Prof, thank you for painting that succinct picture. Because, I mean, if we pull up that apology on our screen, I mean, just to paraphrase or read or extract some of the words on the apology, you know, it goes on to say that I acknowledge that my words and actions have violated the party's disciplinary code of conduct, and I deeply regret any harm that this may have caused. There was Zuma Samudla adding there. And I wonder, you know, on the back of this apology, in relation to obviously some of the other structures in which she represents the MK party, including Parliament and the Southern Caucus of the Pan-African Parliament, what is this indicative of? We're looking at the internal democracy versus the external democracy. What would you say are we seeing within the context of, you know, the party's loyalties, the development thereof, and even just the party's institutionalization at large?
Yeah, I think if we look forward towards the local government election, it is absolutely critically important for MK to establish structures from the branch level up to the national level. And that means especially the function of provinces will be very, very important. But then we are seeing now, as I've explained, that most power is centralized at the top, at the national level, or in the national officials and President Zuma. And I think this is where the contestation starts to happen. Because the other point which I didn't mention, which is implied in this, is that there's no elective processes in the party. So you cannot be elected to the National High Command. You are appointed to it. The conveners in the provinces are also appointed to those positions. That is why Floyd Shivambu could immediately become the Secretary General. There was not an election for that position. Now, because of that, it means that the individual leaders cannot mobilize support over time so that when they go to an elective conference, they can be elected on the basis of that. So the alternative is, therefore, you must have influence right at the top, and you must be very close to the top, and that is President Zuma. And I think that is where his daughter comes in. Because she is his daughter, she assumes that this is by nature, it's a given, that she will have tremendous influence, irrespective of her position in the party. Then, on the other hand, is someone like Floyd Shivambu, who effectively is the number 2 person in the party as the Secretary General. But because that is threatening the position of persons who feel close to President Zuma or through family or other means, through historical ties, he will always be a contested person because he has some powers in his own right as a Secretary General from an administrative, organizational point of view. And those who are close to President Zuma will see him as the person who will prevent them from becoming or assuming the positions that they actually are aspiring to. So I think this creates the inherent instability, organizational instability in the MK is that the normal checks and balances that exist in the party, the normal internal democratic practices, including elective ones, simply don't exist in MK. And I think that is why we are seeing what we are seeing now.
Oh, so Prof, thank you for speaking to that issue as well, because the president of MK Party, Jacob Zuma, had to step in and insist on an apology from Duduzile. The issue of nepotism ultimately comes up. And thank you for sharing your insights on that. But I just wonder beyond that, if we're going to then look at how the party exercises its internal politics and the effect that it's going to have on the democratic state then at large, what do you see playing out on that front as well?
Well, it is important in principle that there's internal democracy in all political parties, because ultimately they are the vehicles through which the public representatives are elected in parliament or in provincial legislatures and even at local level. So if that process isn't inherently democratic, it's going to spill over to the open democratic processes, the public democratic processes. And I think that will ultimately have a negative effect on it if from within these parties, especially now MK, there is this idea that we don't have to be democratic. The processes themselves will sort out and work out who's where, in which position, in which responsibilities. So ultimately, the public democracy depends also on the internal democracy of political parties. If parties are very autocratic, it's very difficult to be in the public domain democratic.
Okay, because possibilities and probabilities are also then being assessed. And, we're looking at some of the research that suggests that organizational characteristics are consequential for electoral success and the durability of political parties. So from your vantage point, what are your predictions of the MK Party's trajectory then?
Well, I think what we see now is that there's going to be, first of all, at local government level, there's going to be a lot of internal contestation of who's going to be the candidates at ward level, as well as on the provincial proportional representation list in the different localities, in the different municipalities. And if that is not managed very well, and we've seen it in the ANC over the years, that became the area of contestation, and where the internal turmoil in the ANC started, where there was, in a sense, capturing of branches by the different factions in the ANC, or gatekeeping that took place. So if MK, and they haven't yet had to go through this process, so this will be a first for them. If they are not exceptionally well organized, it can really lead to an implosion of the party.
Prof, thank you for your time and for weighing in. I'm going to leave the conversation there. Professor Dokuti, of course, a political analyst, weighing in. We know that MK Party MP Duduzile Zuma has issued another apology after insulting the party's Secretary General, Floyd Shivambu. We're just monitoring some of the developments in relation to this, looking at the internal party dynamics, how reflective that is on the democratic state, and really where to from here as we edge closer to the local government elections. Again, thank you to Prof for joining us. As we leave that conversation there, it is time for another ad break. We are back with more after this, so do stay tuned. All right, so welcome back. We're going to continue now with more news at this hour. The National Register for Sex Offenders is set to become publicly accessible by the end of this month. This move is a significant victory for advocacy groups who have been pushing for greater transparency. The announcement comes on the heels of a shocking revelation that over 16,000 teachers in South Africa have criminal records, including sexual offences and murder. So joining me here today to unpack this critical issue is the Managing Director of Mboweni & Partners, Victoria Mboweni. Victoria, thank you for making time to chat with us here on the SABC.
Thank you very much for also being invited. It's an honor on my part. Thank you.
Yeah. So in lieu of the recent developments, some of the strides that have been taken, I wonder if you could paint the picture, given the work that you obviously have done to date. Okay. As a practicing attorney, perhaps you can provide context on the current state of sexual offender registration in South Africa. Mm-hmm. What are the hits and misses?
Okay, so basically the current status of the sex offender is that once you're found guilty of sexual offences, you are registered into sexual offenders registry. And that's obviously when that is done, you are told from court, from the time you are being charged, before you plead guilty or whether you plead not guilty, the judge or the magistrate will advise you that if you are found guilty, there's a minimum sentence involved, and you're also going to be registered on the sexual offenders register. So after that, when you're found guilty, then you get registered in the sexual offenders registry. There's actually two. There's one where you registered if you are found guilty for having violated a child or a mentally disturbed person, and that's the normal one where everyone that's found guilty of sexual offences where that involves even a major can be registered. So now that particular registry has never been made available to the public. It's only made available to maybe private sectors or certain government sectors. You have to make an application, maybe if somebody wants for licensing where it involves minors or anyone with a mental disability, or when you have to be employed at the school where there would be minors, obviously, where you will be in an environment where minors or mentally disturbed people are. Those were the people or the employees that were actually allowed to make that application.
Yeah.
And even the offender themselves would be allowed to make that application. But any other person was not allowed. And even the person that works with the ministry or with that register cannot divulge that information. It would have been seen, or it is seen as an offence, because it was considered not for the public.
So in lieu of this development, I mean, how does it weigh up against international best practices as well?
Okay, so now, in lieu of this, let's say, for example, firstly, let's look at the fact that we have the USA.
Yes.
With the USA, I mean, if you are a citizen in that country, you can simply get on a certain website and search somebody, and you are able to get the information of any person that is a citizen in that country. I think it's USA with its regions. That's the only country that actually allows people to have access to the sexual offenders registry. So with that being said, in our country now, it's actually something that is actually very new. And I am going to actually put it to you that it's probably going to be met with a lot of challenges, because there's already people that are criticizing it.
Let's get into that. What are some of the challenges that you foresee?
As an attorney, I would say I would first start with the offenders. Obviously. Yes. The offenders would obviously feel like maybe their right to human dignity has been tampered with, their right to privacy, it can even extend to the right of security, because they may feel that maybe somebody would look for that information in order to actually violate their right or whatever. You'd find that they probably feel that we have gone through rehabilitation, and we feel like they would feel that now that having the registry made available to the public may further infringe their rights, maybe to affect their employments or anything, etc. But now let's look at the department. You would find that the department is actually relying on Section 32 of the Constitution. Yeah. It says that such information should be made available. And you would find also that even the Section 53 of the Sexual Offences Act itself, it does give the minister that delegation or the authority to actually say, make changes to anything in connection to that after having done the proper consultation, of which I believe that's exactly what's happening. So now, with that being said, it is going to be one person saying this. We don't know how the court is going to receive it. We don't know how the community, everybody's going to receive it, because all we have right now is just an announcement. We're still waiting to actually see what the regulations are going to say, what are going to be the limitations, what are going to be the pros and the cons. We don't know what's going to change, although we do note that the call is for actually the confidentiality clause to actually be removed or attended to. But I do foresee that they might have to actually look at the whole registry from Chapter 6, Section 40 to 52, to actually find that there would be not any loopholes, because some of these loopholes, like Section 40, say list the particulars that can actually apply. It means they need to amend that and add that now any other person that may be having an interest may apply. They also relying the government, obviously, the purpose basically of the Sexual Offences Act, the rationale behind it, if you can look at it, it had always been to protect the public, the vulnerable group, etc. So you will find that maybe they would also argue that in doing this would also be protecting even the children, because the right to children is they're supposed to be safe and not violated. So it's rather going to be a very interesting time.
Lots of questions.
A lot of
questions and answers.
And it's a lot of questions because right now we're just speaking about the announcement. We don't know what the regulations are going to say. We don't know if there are going to be any limitations, what is going to be done to also make sure that nobody feels like now they are being violated or abused. But at the end of the day, the rights of the people and the rights of the community, the court has to listen to it and see which one stands and then make a decision. Because I do foresee that we're going to be having a lot of court drama.
So the justice system obviously has been affected, law enforcement agencies as well. But I wonder, even just in accessing, this register. So we know that there are constraints currently in terms of capacity and resources. One can't ignore that factor.
True.
But even in accessing this, I mean, what measures will be applied for that public consumption, and then also the accuracy, maintaining the accuracy and the timeless nature of it as well, because as it needs to be updated as and when as well.
That's true, and the information there in terms of POPI Act, any information that you want to be it must be correct.
Yes.
It means it has to be, there actually have to be an extra work that's involved and make sure that everything there is correct. And the other issue is that the Sexual Offences Register itself contains the whole information of a person, from the nickname, from the used cell numbers or current addresses and everything. So now we're also waiting to see which part of the information will be giving out, how they're going to respond to the fact that, okay, now this is the part. Obviously, one can, maybe, the government, they're looking at it, for public interest, the person went to court. And in court, he stood before the court and there was public involved, and the court obviously indicated you are going to the sexual registry, and it was still a public. I foresee that they would also be going towards those directions. They also have a legal team, and they would also be having some of us being legal teams on the other side, trying to see what's going on with this. But it's just an interesting thing.
It sounds like more work as well.
It's more work, but I'm going to say one thing about this, that I would like to commend the minister on this. I'm not saying that what she's doing is what should be done. I'm not putting my stand as to whether I'm against or for. I'm simply saying that as a country, we have been complaining about violent crimes. We've been complaining about GBV and anything against women or any vulnerable members. The fact that now there is somebody up there that has actually made this particular decision, it means this person is listening and is attempting to find a solution for the things we're crying about or complaining about. And that is something that should give us as the community actually comfort that somebody is listening, somebody is working on it. Eventually, we're going to find a solution. Now, in this, yes, some of the steps that they're going to take are still going to be tested. People will not agree with them or whatever. But the fact that somebody is listening is now giving you attention. It's a positive thing.
All right. So as those parameters are becoming clearer, or we are attempting to make them clearer, what considerations from your vantage point as an attorney do you have for individuals or even organizations who want to utilize this for background checks, just as it stands at the moment? What would you recommend then?
So for background checks of offenders?
Well, of individuals potentially who are on the list or have been removed from the list, just given that there are so many things that remain unanswered. It's a fact. When it comes to the sexual register itself, has regulations that if a person has done 1, 2, 3, and this is what's happening, this person is then not supposed to be doing 1, 2, 3. Which means now, if we have something like that, it also our responsibilities as employer to actually check and see that everything is in order. For example, I cannot get a teacher
to come and teach a child when I haven't done a thorough check. It's good that for the protection of the children, it has always been there that somebody must do that. Yeah. But it simply means that we all have to step in and do what we're supposed to do. Like right now, if for the interest of the children, because the law says that must be done. You vet the person, you check if really is not on the Sexual Offenders Act. Of course, some of them can be removed after a certain period, and some of them, they stay there permanently because of the nature of the offenses that they have committed. So now it's very important that everybody just should step up and do what they're supposed to do and try to meet each other halfway, and we'll surely figure out what's this thing that's happening is all about.
So it's a significant development, but again, as we reiterated, more questions and answers. But I want to thank you for joining us at this hour.
Thank you very much.
Weighing in, perhaps also helping us understand some of the gaps, but also the strides that have been taken. Victoria Mbuweni joining us, of course, just on the back of the announcement. We know that the National Register for Sex Offenders, it's now set to become publicly accessible. So she joined us and really just helped us understand where to from here, and perhaps helping to create a more safer South Africa. So as we leave that conversation there, we'll be right back after this. Stay tuned. Welcome back. So other issues making headlines now at this hour. Johannesburg water woes should be resolved in the next 7 days. It's according to the City of Johannesburg Executive Mayor Dada Morero, after some Johannesburg residents spent up to 3 weeks without accessing clean potable water. While water utility Johannesburg Water says technicians are currently working tirelessly to ensure that water is restored timelessly.
City of Johannesburg Executive Mayor Dada Morero says 60% of the city's suburbs are without clean potable water. Some areas haven't had water for over 3 weeks. Residents of Hillbrow and surrounding areas have highlighted some of the challenges this predicament has created.
It's been 4 days without water. So there's a tank in Newville whereby there's a pipe that is leaking. So we're fetching water from that pipe for now. But then it's not safe to drink.
The water challenge is affecting most of the area, but not our building in particular. Our building, I think they put in a borehole system because of the issue of water in the area.
It's been 2 weeks, it's water. After water, it's electricity. So we can't have the two. You can't have your cake and eat it. So it's one thing or another.
Beria Reservoir, Forest Hill Tower, Doornkop Reservoir are among the 7 reservoirs that are affected. The local councillors say the city is failing to resolve the situation amicably after residents spent the majority of the month without water.
My residents have been sitting without water for over 3 weeks, and I'm talking about absolutely no water. Section of Ward 66, that is the poorest of the poorest. The people have to walk kilometers of buckets on their heads to get water. Kids, children, old people, young people, and that is inhumane.
The City of Johannesburg has signed a contract with a company for 263 million rand to provide extra water tankers, about 75 water tankers in total. If one calculates it, that works out to 3 million rand per water tanker. The City of Joburg could have probably bought 2 water tankers, or probably 150 water tankers for that price.
Joburg Water attributes the water shortage to heightened demand by residents and power outages at some water pumps. Mayor Dada Morero has apologized for the inconvenience caused and has assured residents that water should be fully restored within 7 days.
There are interventions that we as the accountable water utility needs to do. Some of those interventions are these restrictions that we present every night is not to apply punitive measures, not at all. What they are meant to do is to restrict the system so that we can conserve the flow of water that we're getting from Rand Water.
We are now pumping from Rand Water, and then we'll pump into the systems of Joburg Water in our reservoirs. So by the time the reservoirs would be filled, we think that it will take a good 7 days.
As to whether the water will be fully restored in Johannesburg within 7 days, residents say they will have to see it to believe it. Offense Estimo, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Meanwhile, government says there's a need to put urgent measures in place to combat the sources of pollution in the catchment area of the Harbeespoort Dam in the Northwest Province. Water and Sanitation Deputy Minister Selo Sitloho visited the dam to assess progress on the 3-year rehabilitation program undertaken by Magalies Water to remove the hyacinth plants.
The invasive plants have clogged up the dam for years. Thousands of fish have as a result died over the past months due to lack of oxygen in the water, affecting those fishing around the dam.
A few months ago, the plants were so bad that the whole lake was covered. The water became stagnant, the fish died. You can't really go fishing because the whole lake is covered with the hyacinth. It just made it a bad experience.
These are quite a very hard challenge, man. Because suffering, like our lines get caught, getting pulled, so then we have to cut lines, losing big fish, and we're having competition here most of the time, you see. And we want to win those competitions, really.
Though coverage on the dam currently stands at 33%, challenges remain.
The unfortunate part is that the hyacinth remains in the water, and even when we have it not showing at the top of the water, it is actually present at the river, at the dam or the catchment bank as a seed bank. So what happens is, as soon as the conditions become favorable.
The spike in Harbeespoort has also been attributed to pollution with industrial chemicals and littering on the rivers. But it's been largely strained due to mismanagement of wastewater treatment from urban zones within its catchment area.
Almost 2 years ago, that Magalies was appointed as the implementing agent for the Department of Water and Sanitation to particularly address the issue of the hyacinth plant that is here. The issue, of course, goes around in the detrimental impact that this has had economically in the community of Harties, particularly those that undertake recreational and tourism activities here.
Every single year, following this increase in plants and in plant growth at the beginning of the season, so in springtime, when all these little seedlings start to generate, the little hoppers have to increase with the plants, and then they reach a peak population and crash. And over winter we have no plants, but then again, every single season we get the plant growth and the insects have to increase their populations. And that's exactly what we're seeing on the system this year as well.
It is estimated that the dam, which used to be brimming with people enjoying the scenic landscapes and recreational water sports, has 3 million visitors annually and generates 1.4 billion rand for the province. Mulimo Nemotwa, SABC News, Harbeespoort Dam.
While municipalities that lost millions of rands in illegal investments into the now defunct VBS Mutual Bank have started recouping some of their losses through the bank's liquidation process. Now, the bank's liquidator says that about 670 million rand has thus so far been recovered from the bank's debtors and is currently being paid back to individual depositors and municipalities. 14 municipalities and thousands of clients have invested billions of rands in the mutual bank before it collapsed over 6 years ago.
14 municipalities in Limpopo, the Northwest and Gauteng illegally invested more than R1 billion meant for service delivery into VBS. 13 have now started recovering some of their losses. The 14th municipality, the Elias Motsoaledi, had withdrawn its investment by the time the mutual bank collapsed. The Bembe District municipality had illegally invested the highest amount of public funds at 316 million rand. The municipality has so far recovered 80 million rand. According to the liquidator, approximately 400 million rand will be paid to 13 municipalities who have submitted valid claims for recovery.
The liquidator VBS has a civil remit to collect outstanding monies of the 2.3 billion of the bank for the benefit of the VBS creditors. Legal action against any persons involved in illegal activities surrounding VBS is part of a criminal investigation and does not fall part of the liquidator's remit. The team does, however, provide support to those who are involved in the criminal investigations. The liquidator's team will continue to trace and recover assets of the bank in anticipation of making an additional payment to creditors in the future.
Brechman says the liquidator will continue collecting more than 2.3 billion rand from the bank's debtors.
The retail depositors, who consist of individuals, burial societies, saving clubs and stokvels, and who held up to 100,000 Rand in their VBS accounts have been fully reimbursed. This was through the assistance of the National Treasury, who provided a guarantee to the South African Reserve Bank. Depositors who held over 100,000 Rand in their VBS accounts fall into the concurrent creditor category. Creditors who have submitted valid claims and have received payment of their first dividend will shortly be receiving their second payment, which is currently being finalized.
The Collins Chabane local municipality had illegally invested 120 million Rand. The municipality has thus far recovered 30 million Rand.
As Collins Chabane local municipality, we are one of those municipalities which invested money at the now defunct VBS Bank. Up to now, due to the efforts of the curator, our municipality have recovered 30 million Rand of the amount which was deposited to the bank. We have since channeled that amount of 30 million to projects which relate to service delivery in the municipality.
The Limpopo Department of Cooperative Governance says it expects the recouped funds to be directed towards service delivery.
You will find a municipality like Wembe, they got about 80 million. You will go to Fetako Mutuwaze, they got about 58 million. You go to Greater Giari, they get about 10 million. You go to Lipele Nkumpe, they got about 39 million. So I may not necessarily be aware now. As the process continues, when people are submitting their claims to the curators to be paid, I think it's a particular sense into the rents that they have been invested, and that makes municipalities to recover and get the income that they lost. And I think some of the municipalities, out of the money they have lost now, they are starting to calculate how much money is remaining, and we should be able to reinvest this money to service delivery.
VBS Mutual Bank was declared insolvent in 2018 following the looting of nearly 2 billion Rand. The bank was then placed under curatorship, which later resulted in its liquidation the following year. Biman Baloi, SABC News, Polokwane.
All right, let's take a look at some live visuals coming through. We're obviously still monitoring developments in relation to the Israel-Hamas ceasefire that is underway. We do know that as it stands, those are live visuals on your screen. Israel has now begun to free 369 Palestinians after captives in Gaza have been released. So we know that 369 Palestinian prisoners that were held in Israeli jails after 3 captives in Gaza were freed are also going to be exchanged. At this point, we do know that it is happening in the Gaza Strip in the 6th such exchange, following days of tense negotiations that threatened to undo the ceasefire. We do know that Egypt and Qatar played a huge role in terms of mediators to help avert a standoff that threatened to sink that fragile ceasefire. So as it stands, we also know that information coming through, it is the largest number of Palestinians to be freed since the beginning of the truce. We do know that, as you can see on your screen, footage really just indicating that a busload of Palestinian prisoners from Alpha prison, they're arriving in Ramallah, that's in the occupied West Bank, where they are being met by relatives and even just supporters and media alike. We also understand that more buses full of Palestinians that have been pulled out of an Israeli prison in the Negev desert heading towards Gaza is also set to occur. But we're monitoring those developments, of course, as the day progresses. It's obviously just in agreement to the ceasefire, the 42-day ceasefire that so far has been maintained. Most of the prisoners arrested in Gaza will be sent back to the besieged enclave. We also understand that about 10 will be released in the occupied West Bank, 1 in occupied East Jerusalem. The others will also be sent to Egypt. And so we're monitoring those developments as it unfolds. Well, as we continue with more stories now, perhaps some local news. Experts say that maize meal prices are on track to stabilize this year following a challenging 2023-2024 maize production season. Prices jumped 30% year on year in the last quarter of 2024. That's going into the beginning of this year. However, they are expected to moderate in the second quarter of the year, where Chief Economist at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, Wandile Sihlobo, says that consequently consumers can brace themselves for some short-term pain.
Sihlobo explains that it takes approximately 3 to 4 months before farm-level prices impact grain commodity prices. He says, as a result, it will take some time before the current price trends are passed on to consumers.
While the maize prices now have started to decline significantly, yellow maize is less than 5,000 rand a ton, white maize is less than 5,500 rand a ton, and it continues to decline, and we hope so. But all of these declines that are started last week will, in all likelihood, mirror into the consumer after 3 months or so because of the time lag of processing, transportation, and all of those things.
Maize meal prices increased largely due to supply constraints, which are set to improve this year. Sihlobo says they do not foresee significant risks to the outlook, given that South Africa is a net exporter in agriculture.
The major products that we import in food are rice, wheat, palm oil, and whiskey. And much of these products are not coming from the United States or elsewhere. They largely from the EU countries, the Middle East, the Middle Eastern Asian countries, and then you see some of these products coming, of course, from the Black Sea, like wheat and the other products. So in our assessment, there's a lot of wheat in the world. There's a lot of rice in the world. And we think all of this bodes well with the price view in South Africa.
Sihlobo warns, however, that the major risk relates to the currency, which, if the global macroeconomic shocks do materialize, could affect import prices. He says the other factor to watch is fuel prices, because oil price shocks and currency pressures could pose a risk to the maize price outlook. Nosipho Radebe, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Sentiments that South Africa is on the path to becoming Zimbabwe 2.0 are without merit. That's according to experts. This comes after US President Donald Trump's temporary withdrawal of foreign aid to South Africa, painting a probe into the false claims of land grabs in the country, raised fears of what this move symbolized for the country. While some have watered down this latest move by the superpower, Zimbabweans have first-hand experience and they hold a different view. SABC News senior reporter Kani Mapanga filed this report.
We don't mind having and bearing sanctions banning us from Europe. We are not Europeans. We have not asked for any inch of Europe or any square inch of that territory. So, Blair, keep your England and let me keep my Zimbabwe.
These were the famous words of former Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe that reverberated across the walls of the 2002 Earth Summit held in Johannesburg and continue to be etched in history. Sanctions were a culmination of allegations of grand corruption by the country's leaders, a controversial land reform program, disputed elections, and reported human rights abuses. Zimbabwe's economy would then go into freefall with a weakened Zim dollar, crippled institutions, and its citizens heading for the borders in search of a better quality of life.
In Zimbabwe, the sanctions were targeted against individuals, but naturally what they end up doing is that because of over-regulation by international institutions, they end up affecting other people that are not related to those individuals and other institutions that are not related to those individuals.
More than 2 decades later, the land question, which thrust the former breadbasket of Africa into the spotlight, has now also seen South Africa placed under the global lens. Misinformation behind the newly signed Expropriation Act has seen the US issue an executive order withdrawing foreign aid from South Africa on the basis of a false claim that land was being grabbed from white South African farmers. For some, the question is whether this is a precursor to the devastation suffered in Zimbabwe.
Well, in my view, the two situations can't be compared.
Zimbabwe had 21 years of different forms of US sanctions that was lifted in 2024. They still have a special type of US sanction called Global Magnitsky sanctions. And these Global Magnitsky sanctions, in the case of Zimbabwe, are still in place in respect of the president of the country, Emerson Mnangagwa, and his wife Auxilia, and about 10 other powerful officials. And these sanctions are in place against these individuals for their involvement in corruption or serious human rights abuse. So these are special case sanctions, and I do not see this happening in South Africa.
Rousseau added that the removal of aid is not considered a sanction, but rather is simply a voluntary arrangement or decision to help or not help another country or people in another country. Chinona, however, contends that it is a sanction, but charges that it would not produce a quote-unquote Zimbabwe 2.0.
I think both of them, the South African scenario and the Zimbabwean scenario, are all sanctions. Donald Trump sanctioned South Africa by denying it aid. It's a sanction. But the sanctions are different in that the sanctions against South Africa will never make South Africa a Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a basket case today because of the inability to run the country, the cluelessness, incompetence, and more importantly, the grand looting of public funds, the corruption that the whole world has now come to know Zimbabwe of. That's what destroyed Zimbabwe.
But Zimbabwean businessman Chester Mende, who has lived through the chaos of the targeted sanctions, begs to differ.
You look at, most of our banks in Zimbabwe, targeted or not, they are struggling to get lines of credit. Now, I'm not sure if that is what you call targeted sanctions. Why are they not able to get lines of credit? They're obviously not able to get lines of credit because your country is blacklisted. So if the country is blacklisted, is it the leaders that are blacklisted? I would argue not.
While economists argue that fears of a Zimbabwe 2.0 are without merit, and the focus should be on ensuring that South Africa does not lose its AGOA benefits.
We have to look at our AGOA benefits, which we might lose, which will be a severe blow to our agricultural exports to the US and to our vehicle manufacturing exports to the US. It will be a severe blow and will unfortunately have very negative knock-on effects in South Africa in terms of employment.
Mende, however, contends that the current developments are essentially an omen of the bleak future South Africans can expect.
Without a shadow of doubt, you're going to see this happening, and the quality of your life for the everyday South African is going to reduce. The cost of your commodities, of whatever nature, your groceries, is going to increase. Watch the space in the next, 12 months or so, and you better be ready for it because it's a painful situation.
Kani Mapanga, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, US Vice President J.D. Vance has called for a bigger role for Europe's hardline anti-migration parties, where he also says those who express populist views are being repressed. Vance shocked delegates at the Munich Security Conference in a speech in which he attacked European countries for what he called a retreat of fundamental values.
In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat.
U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance accused European leaders on Friday of censoring free speech and failing to control immigration in an address at the Munich Security Conference in Germany.
I really do believe that allowing our citizens to speak their mind will make them stronger still, which of course brings us back to Munich, where the organizers of this very conference have banned lawmakers representing populist parties on both the left and the right from participating in these conversations.
The comments drew a sharp rebuke from Germany's defense minister Boris Pistorius and overshadowed discussions on the war in Ukraine.
This democracy was called into question earlier by the U.S. Vice President for the whole of Europe. He spoke of the cancellation of democracy, and if I understood him correctly, he compared conditions in parts of Europe with those in authoritarian regimes. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not acceptable.
The clash underlined the divergent worldviews of U.S. President Donald Trump's new administration and European leaders, making it hard for longtime allies, the United States and Europe, to find common ground on issues including Ukraine. The war-torn country's President Volodymyr Zelensky told the conference that he would talk to Russian President Vladimir Putin only once Ukraine had agreed on a common plan with Trump and European leaders.
I will meet with Russians, with only one Russian guy, with Putin, only after we will have common plan with Trump, Europe, and we will sit with Putin and stop the war. Only in this case I'm ready to meet, not in other compromises platforms.
He also met with Vance to discuss the path forward. Both sides declined to give details of what they discussed, but the Ukrainian president reiterated that his country needs real security guarantees.
Well, just like that, we have come to the end of the show. Thank you very much for tuning in. That's where we're going to leave it for today. But of course, do join us tomorrow as we take a look at the week ahead. It has been an absolute pleasure from myself, Liesl Wilson, and the rest of the team. Until next time, take care. Up next is SA Today. Do stay tuned to DSB Channel 404. You're watching SABC News.